For a brief moment in the early 1990s, Sacramento ruled the football world, from almost bringing the Los Angeles Raiders to town to eventually becoming champions of the American football playing world. It was a fleeting, glorious moment for the city. If the Dallas Cowboys are America's team, then I guess that made Sacramento and the Surge the world's team for those 3 years between 1990 and 1992. Those that lived it wouldn't trade the memories for the world. The history of the Sacramento Surge is equal parts chaos and charm. They didn't simply win a national title in a national sports league. Their championship was international, spanning all longitudes and latitudes. This is when Sacramento ruled the football world.
K. Stevenson, the Sacramento Surge, rules the world.
Toward the back end of 1991 and the early stages of 1992, things from a sporting perspective in Sacramento have gone absolutely off the rails. Magic Johnson is rebuffed in his attempt to buy the Kings. A group continues to work behind the scenes on the city's NFL expansion bid, and no work is being done on that team's proposed stadium over at the Arco Arena site, a project that threatens to bankrupt everyone involved. That leaves the Sacramento Surge in a bit of an odd spot as their second season in the World League of American Football approaches. Honestly, the situation was one that could have seen them featured on Sacramento's very own dating program, Scratch.
The Dateless and Desperate Club here on Scratch. Today, we're at El Camino High School.
About 15 or so years after that very segment is filmed, I'll be walking those same halls over at El Camino Fundamental High School, setting a new standard for dateless and desperate. I either raised the bar, lowered the bar. How does one quantify being more of a loser? You know, none of this is important. The Surge spent most of their 1991 season as losers as well, but a new season and a new home brought renewed optimism that they could conquer the football world. Before that, though, NFL Commissioner Paul Tagliabue made a visit to the capital of California, where Surge owner Fred Anderson and some local dignitaries took him on a tour of all of the city's famed sites.
Sacramento, where California begins.
Oh, sorry, I read that incorrect. They actually took the NFL commissioner to go see a big-ass hole in the ground in the Thomas, and then they wined and dined him at the Hyatt Regency, which I guess was still kind of a big thing in 92. One of the themes of his visit was that the Surge and the World League of American Football were here to stay. We'll see how all of that plays out. Buffalo loses its second straight Super Bowl in January 1992, and a few days later, attention turns to the NFL's pet project. What is now known as the World League. American football has been dropped from the official name, meaning it's no longer a WLAF matter. February 1992 comes and it is time for some roster building. Unlike the previous season, all the World League franchises headed into year 2 with some sort of a roster intact. Not everyone was back from the initial campaign, but everyone had some guys. There would also be a draft of free agents. More importantly, though, a lot of guys from NFL rosters would be joining the league this time around. The first year only saw a handful of NFLers play on loan in the World League, and that certainly, well, it both hindered quality and made the league sort of useless from the NFL standpoint because it wanted this to serve as a developmental project. There was a real desire in the second go-round to embrace the newly christened World League as a full-fledged developmental system. Those players, though, would be assigned to clubs after the draft. The name of the game for Sacramento was find a starting quarterback. Play under center in 91 was just really bad, and it cost the team a chance at reaching the postseason. Sacramento's 3-7 record did mean it held the second overall pick in this World League draft. However, they held visions of securing that first overall pick, which was held by the Ohio Glory, who were previously known as the Raleigh-Durham Skyhawks. After a lot of on-again and off-again and on-again talks, a swap was finally agreed upon that saw the Surge trade the second pick in the draft as well as center Curtis Wilson for first overall. But there was a catch. League officials had held back some players who weren't under contract with an NFL team from the draft. We'll get into this a little bit later, but it did at least throw a wrench initially into the Surge front office's plans. That being said, Sacramento did find another reason to select first overall, targeting linebacker George Bethune, a solid hand who played 32 games for the Rams in his first 2 seasons in the big leagues. Surge general manager Mike Keller claimed he could make a Lawrence Taylor type impact. Fun fact, by the way, this would be the first ever trade in World League or World League of American Football history. Another first for Sacramento. The 2-day draft comes to an end and the Surge pick a bunch of guys who you may have heard. I mean, unlike 1991, which was just a bunch of nobodies, this class has some recognizable faces, although a lot of that has to do with what these players would become later on in life. In the second round, the Surge take running back Mike Pringle, who had been incredible at Cal State Fullerton. He'd later go on to break all kinds of CFL records. In the 7th round, the Surge took defensive lineman Bill Goldberg, who of course goes on to find fame in WCW years after this, albeit with much less hair. ESPN analyst Louis Riddick would be taken later on in the draft, as well as Jay Gruden, although he doesn't make the team out of training camp. Meanwhile, advanced season ticket sales are going better than they did in 1991. Ownership reports some 15,000 deposits had been made as Sacramento embarked on its second season over at Hornets Stadium. This number though, well, let's just say not all of those deposits would turn into season ticket holders. It should also be mentioned Sacramento Surge marketing efforts are still a bit questionable. What the Surge did not have was a quarterback, at least not a good one, a one who would be capable of guiding the team to victories, but the front office knew exactly who they wanted. That would be David Archer. The passer was a solid starter for the Falcons and had been a backup for a few teams after injuring his shoulder. The Surge had an in. Their offensive coordinator, Jim Criner, actually coached Archer at Iowa State back in the early 1980s. This connection saw Archer want to come and play for his former college ball coach. Getting him to Sacramento was the larger challenge. Archer was not under contract with an NFL team, which meant he couldn't be distributed alongside the other NFL players to be loaned out to their World League counterparts. That, of course, meant he should have been made available in the free agent draft, but the World League doesn't expose him to that, knowing full and well he wanted to go play in Sacramento. It's a messy, confusing situation in which the league basically admits to colluding with the Surge to get Archer there. But hey, you gotta do what you gotta do. As far as actual NFL contracted players, more than 100 would find their way to the World League for the 92 season. Sacramento would land themselves a little-known defensive lineman from the Seattle Seahawks who would go on to have perhaps the greatest legacy of anyone on that team. At least from an NFL standpoint, Michael Sinclair wasn't much when he was assigned to play for the Surge, but he would go on to become a Pro Bowler and one of the Seahawks' best players in franchise history. Also suiting up for the Surge would be Mike Jones, who?
I'm Mike Jones, Mike Jones, I'm Mike Jones, Mike Jones.
All right, let's break up that death loop here and there. This Mike Jones was on loan from the then Los Angeles Raiders. He would go on later in his career to be responsible for one of the Super Bowl's most famous plays ever, the tackle. It's safe to say the 1992 Surge roster was a vast improvement on that 1991 side, even if we didn't know at the time just what a lot of these players would go on to be later on in life when they realized their full potential. Hey, you gotta start somewhere, and that somewhere just happened to be Hornet Stadium on the campus of Sacramento State University. However, before they got to there, they actually had to spend training camp down in San Marcos, Texas. This was part of the whole World League initiative where they just wanted to have a pod of all the teams so they could scrimmage and they could practice and everyone was sort of there in the same place, saving costs. Meanwhile, back in Sacramento, the city was being treated to the California Hard Bodies Female Oil Wrestling at Paradise Beach. A first time for everything, no doubt. I love the headliners at this event at Paradise Beach are a former Miss Miller Lite and a former Miss English Leather.
And I like a man to wear English leather or wear nothing at all.
That, of course, is from the old aftershave, which I completely forgot was a thing. I know someone will defend English leather, but seriously, who would want to smell, as the Brits say, proper rank? I mean, who wants to smell like a used saddle? Sadly, some of these Surge players wouldn't be around for the California Hard Bodies all-female oil wrestling show should it ever return to the city. The front office made 5 trades in a single day in order to cut down the roster to the league's mandated maximum. Considering 0 trades were made in all of the league's first year, for 5 to happen in the span of a few hours on one day was quite the shock. There was finally some action on the field as the Surge opened the expanded Hornet Stadium with a preseason victory over the Montreal Machine. More than 14,000 people turned up for that exhibition game. Sadly though, leading into this season, it feels like Surge fever is a little more subdued than it was in 1991. Much of that is due to a Days of Our Life-esque saga surrounding the Kings, who are being sold to a Southern California property developer, that being Jim Thomas, who may or may not want to move the Kings down to Anaheim and a new facility being built there. As they always say, history repeats itself, folks. Also, before the season kicks off, the Sacramento Bee runs what it calls a Surge Purge contest, where they ask readers to come up with a new name, a new logo, a new brand identity for the team, and there were two that really stuck out to me. First were the Sacramento Redskins, which was based on tomatoes, and I thought that was kind of clever given the city's history with tomatoes and tomato truck accidents. The second was this Sacramento Barbs submission, which looks suspiciously similar to a tattoo a certain Surge player would later become famous for. They're kind of different, not by a whole lot though. It doesn't matter. It's finally time to start the 1992 campaign. Some real football is coming, and the Surge are kicking off their season at home at their newly renovated Hornet Stadium with a showdown against the Birmingham Fire. The weather was far nicer than the previous season's opener. The quarterback play was also vastly improved, yet attendance wasn't significantly higher for this game than the 1991 debut over at Hughes Stadium. Sacramento was led by David Archer, who went 18 for 32 at 272 yards. A breath of fresh air compared to the likes of Mike Elkins and Ben Bennett. The real story here, though, was the Surge's defense. They were dominant, and Birmingham just could not do anything against them. Surge win the first one. A week later, Sacramento held another opponent to 6 points, this time on the road against the Ohio Glory. Next was a matchup against the Montreal Machine, and the defense did its part here again, holding the Canadian side to 7 points. Offensively, it wasn't so great. The Surge required a late touchdown to break a 7-7 deadlock, and honestly, the offense just not quite firing in all cylinders. That changed the following week when Sacramento set all kinds of offensive records in an overtime loss to the San Antonio Riders. That continued the team's trend of losing in added time, and things would not get better. They headed to Birmingham for a rematch against the Fire. Their 2 fourth-quarter turnovers cost them a chance at winning the game. We're at the midway point of the 1992 season, and things aren't looking great for the Surge. They sit 3-2, but that finds them bottom of the North American West Division standings. No, it's not a bleak situation. The teams above them, the Riders and Fire, were each 3-1. However, this was the complete opposite of 91, when all 3 teams were bad and struggled to get to 500. Off the field, you get a lingering sense that the situation is not going great or even as expected, although those running the franchise desperately try to spin it positively. Despite playing in the much bigger Hornet Stadium, attendance is only marginally improved year over year. The 15,000 season ticket deposits made for the Surge only led to about 13,000 season ticket purchases, putting the numbers in line with basically what they had in 91. Also, everybody in town knew it was super easy to find comped Surge tickets. They were handing them out like candy. Seriously, all you needed to do was show up to a Bel Air and there was like a 45% chance you'd land some Surge tickets. The Surge's surge to the postseason began with the side's 2 most difficult road trips back to back, a trip to London followed by a visit to Montreal. It wasn't easy and players didn't love it, but the Surge emerged from their 18-day, 12,000-mile road trip with a pair of victories. Sacramento was now sitting on top of the North American West Division standings, and business was picking up. This was just the beginning of the Surge's run. The return home was extraordinarily sweet as the team obliterated the Frankfurt Galaxy 51-7. The exploits of the Surge and this impressive 3-game winning streak was overshadowed quite a bit by Surge owner Fred Anderson's dalliances with NFL expansion, that being tied to the futile attempt to build that Arco Park Stadium. Anderson was struggling with that, but the Surge had no issues dispatching the Ohio Glory in their final home game of the season, and that sets up a last week showdown with the San Antonio Riders, a winner-take-all affair, sort of, With both teams sitting at 7-2, the victor would be assured the division crown and a home playoff date. The loser would need to wait until the following day to find their fate, which was tied to the result of the Birmingham Fire Ohio Glory contest, although that seemed like it would be a foregone conclusion. The Fire were 6-2-1 and taking on that Glory side, who was 1-8 on the year. A win for the Fire mean they would advance to the playoffs as the World League's wild card, condemning the loser of the Surge Riders game to a postseason at home. What took place on this day was one of the best games in World League history, a back and forth contest where both teams were really giving their all. Despite trailing at halftime, the Surge stormed back in the second stanza, scoring 13 unanswered points with a smooth touchdown grab by downtown Eddie Brown, sealing the win and the division for Sacramento. When you look at the regular season in 1992 for the Surge, it is absolutely night and day when compared to that first go-round, which was hard on the eyes. That inaugural campaign was a bunch of guys on their way out of football, really. Like, not many of them go on to the NFL, and most of them end up not playing football professionally again. The Surge 92 roster had a great pedigree of either guys who had experience in the NFL or who would go on to at least have a cup of coffee professionally. David Archer is undoubtedly the most interesting story here just because of who he was and what he wanted. By this stage in his career, he's entering his 30s. He just wanted an opportunity to play football, to start for a team, and he didn't really care who it was. Archer admitted during the season he didn't want to hold a clipboard anymore, and no one in the NFL was giving him the opportunity to play. Archer took that opportunity with both hands. When you look at his exploits in 92 with the Surge and a year later with the Sacramento Gold Miners in 1993, it is without question to say he was better than several NFL quarterbacks on rosters at that time. Of course, they had some draft cachet behind them. Jim Everett was a complete disaster despite being roughly the same age as Archer. Jack Trudeau would start 5 games for the Colts in 92 and 93. I cannot explain why. I cannot give you a good reason why, apart from the fact that the Colts had spent a second-round draft pick on him at once.
Watch this. Pierre Trudeau could have thrown it better.
When you look at Archer's body of work, he would have been an upgrade on Jack Trudeau. Elsewhere on the Surge offense, Mike Pringle goes on to have a legendary career in the CFL. Downtown Eddie Brown was another good player in Canada. He has perhaps the most famous catch in Grey Cup history. Tight end Paul Green starts for a few seasons for the Seahawks. The real story of the Sacramento Surge in 1992 was the defensive line, which was absolutely dominant. The name that gets the most attention here, of course, is going to be Bill Goldberg because of what he goes on to do later on in life. Everyone just gravitates towards him, and let's be real, Goldberg was not a world beater, but he did his job on the interior of the defensive line. And you look at his physical profile, you look at his athleticism, and it's easy to see why he would go on to hang with the Atlanta Falcons for a few seasons after his stint in Sacramento. Helping Goldberg, though, was having 2 of the best edge rushers in all of the World League lining up outside of him. Michael Sinclair was a stud, posting 10 sacks on the year and being a disruptive handful. He was clearly destined for bigger and better things down the road, even if he wouldn't quite realize it after his time in the World League. Meanwhile, the Surge's first pick in that 1992 free agent draft, George Bethune, had himself a really good year as well, totaling 7 sacks after he wraps up with Sacramento. He's in a few training camps with NFL franchises. Bethune's problem is that he was that weird tweener you saw quite a bit in the 90s. He wasn't quite fast enough to be that outside linebacker. He wasn't quite big enough to be your edge defensive end, and he really gets lost in the shuffle. These players, though, as good as they were in the regular season, could not rest just yet. The Sacramento Surge had a home date with the Barcelona Dragons. Hornet Stadium would play host to Sacramento's first ever World League playoff game, and it was an exciting time for the town and team. In the final installment of this look at the history of the Sacramento Surge, we look at the team's run to the World Bowl in 1992 and how the league came crumbling down shortly thereafter. Thank you for watching this video. If you would like to know more about Sacramento's equally weird world team tennis team, that's going to be in the upper left-hand corner of your screen. And for more of this Sacramento Surge series, video or playlist on the lower left-hand corner. Until next time, I am Cheyenne Hollis. This is The Touchback. And as always, hashtag take it out to the 25.